If you've been searching for a way to make homeownership on the North Shore actually pencil out, you've probably typed in some version of this into Google at midnight. Can you house hack in a place like Northbrook? And most of what comes back is written for Chicago or Indianapolis or some other market with duplexes and fourplexes on every block. That's not what you have here. So today's video is going to answer the real question: what does house hacking actually look like on the North Shore? Where does it work, where it doesn't, and how do you find a property that you can actually offset your mortgage without buying something that isn't what it claims to be? So let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is the Caroline Gow team based in Northbrook, Illinois, serving families across the North Shore for 24 years. This channel exists to give you real, straightforward information about buying and selling on the North Shore. Not fluff, not generic advice that could apply to any city in the country. If that's what you're looking for, go ahead and hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss anything. Now let's talk about house hacking. Here's the thing that surprises most people when they start looking into this locally. Northbrook is not a market of 2 flats or 3 flats the way parts of the city are. You're not going to pull up on the MLS and filter for multi-unit buildings and get a real list to work with. That kind of inventory basically doesn't exist here in any meaningful volume. So if your mental picture of house hacking came from a YouTube video about Chicago's Logan Square or Bucktown, you need to reset that picture before you start searching really on the table. A single family home with a legitimate second living space built into it, a finished basement with its own entrance, an in-law suite, and in some cases a coach house on the property. These aren't as common and straightforward as single-level family living, but they're out there, and when you find the right one, the math can change substantially. Let's take these one at a time. The first category, and probably the most common one you'll come across, is the finished basement with a separate entrance. This is exactly what it sounds like. A basement that's been built out with its own exterior access, so someone living down there isn't walking through your kitchen to come and go. On the North Shore, this typically shows up as a walkout or an English basement with a side or rear door, sometimes with its own small kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough square footage to function as real living space rather than a rec room with a couch in it. The value here is flexibility. You could rent out that space to offset your mortgage. You could use it for extended family. You could hold it as a long-term option and only activate it when you need to. But here's the part that trips most people up. A finished basement with a walkout is not automatically a legal second unit. Whether that space can be actually rented out and is its own unit depends on Northbrook zoning and building code. And that's something you need to verify before you ever assume it's part of your financial plan. More on that in a minute. The second category is the in-law suite, sometimes called accessory dwelling space. This is usually a more fully built out setup than a basement conversion. Its own entrance, its own kitchen, its own bathroom, sometimes on the main level or in an addition off the back of the house rather than below grade. These were often built originally for an actual family member, a parent or a grandparent, which is exactly where the name comes from. The advantage of an in-law suite over a basement conversion is that it tends to feel more like a genuinely separate home, which matters both for a tenant's experience and for resale down the line. The trade-off is that these are rarer, and when they do show up, they tend to move fast because buyers who understand what they're looking at recognize the value immediately. The third category, and the rarest of the three, is the coach house. On the North Shore, you're not going to find a true multi-unit apartment building the way you might in the city. So a coach house, a small secondary structure on the same lot as the main home, sometimes above the detached garage, is about as close as it gets to that kind of setup here. When these exist, they're often older properties built at a time when a coach house served as either housing for a household staff or a garage with an apartment above it. Today, that same structure can function as a rental unit, a home office, a guest space, or a multi-generational housing. Coach houses come with their own layer of zoning and code questions, which the team will get to shortly. But when the numbers work out, they can be one of the strongest house hacking setups available in this market. because you get truly a separate structure rather than a shared roof line. Now here's where we want to slow down, because this is the single most important thing to understand before you go into this kind of search with real expectations. These properties do not advertise themselves clearly. A listing will very often say finished basement, full bath, and stop there. It won't say in-law suite. It won't say second kitchen. It won't say income potential. Sometimes that's because the listing agent doesn't fully understand what they're marketing. Sometimes it's because the seller never used the space that way and it doesn't think to mention it. Either way, you can't rely on listing remarks to find these properties. You need someone looking at the actual layout, the actual entrances, and the actual utility setup to recognize the potential, which is exactly why this is a search where having the right team matters more than usual. Let's talk about financing next, because this is where a lot of buyers get confused and where getting it wrong can cost you options. If you're buying a straightforward single-family home with a finished basement that you might rent out informally, you're most likely looking at a standard conventional mortgage, the same as any other single-family purchase on the North Shore. The rental potential of the basement doesn't usually change your loan type. It's simply a feature of the house. But if the property is structured as a legally recognized 2 to 4 unit building, which again is rare here, but does exist in some pockets, you're in a different financing conversation entirely. FHA offers specific loan programs for 2 to 4 unit properties, and one of the notable advantages is that a lender can, in certain cases, count a portion of the projected rental income from the other units toward helping you qualify for the loan. That's a meaningful difference from a conventional loan on a single-family home, where rental income from a basement or an in-law suite generally isn't factored into your qualifying numbers the same way, because it isn't a separate legal unit. Our team wants to be clear here. This is general information, not a substitute for a conversation with your lender about your specific situation, your credit profile, and the specific property you're considering. But understanding that there's a real difference between financing a single-family home with rental potential and financing a legally classified multi-unit property will help you ask better questions before you're deep into a transaction. This leads directly into permitting, which is honestly the part of this conversation that matters most and gets talked about the least. Just because a basement has a kitchenette and its own entrance does not mean it's legally permitted as a rental unit. Northbrook, like most North Shore suburbs, has zoning and building code requirements that govern what can and can't be rented out as a separate living space. Things like egress window requirements for safety, fire separation between units, parking requirements, and in some cases, outright restrictions on how many unrelated people can occupy a property or whether accessory units are permitted on that lot at all. A basement can be beautifully finished and still not legally rentable as its own unit. This is not a detail to guess on or assume. Before you count on rental income from any secondary space, you need to verify the permitted use with the village and ideally involve your attorney during the contract process to confirm what's actually allowed on that specific property. Our team has seen buyers make offers on a space that could generate income, only to find out after closing that it wasn't a legal setup. And by then, the flexibility they were counting on isn't there anymore. Doing this verification before you're under contract, or at the very least during your attorney review period, protects you from that outcome entirely. Property taxes are the next piece, and this one is specific to Illinois. So if you're coming from another state, pay close attention here. Cook County calculates property taxes differently than most of the country. And it's not simply a matter of lowering a purchase price, meaning a lower tax bill. A property with legally finished accessory unit, additional square footage, or improvements like a coach house can be assessed differently than a comparable home without those features. This isn't something the team can give you an exact number on in a video because it depends entirely on a specific property, its assessed value, and the exemptions that may or may not apply to your situation. But it's an important piece of your overall math when you're evaluating whether a house hacking property actually pencils out. A property that looks like a great deal on the surface can look very different once you factored in the full tax picture. So this is worth discussing directly with your agent and, where appropriate, a tax professional before you finalize your numbers. Now let's talk about how you actually search for one of these properties, because this is where most buyers go wrong. If your plan is to type finished basement in with income potential into a listing search and wait for results, you're going to be waiting a long time, and you're going to miss most of what's actually out there. The properties that work for house hacking on the North Shore are found by touring with intention, not by filtering online. That means working with someone who knows what to look for the moment they walk into a basement or an addition, separate electric panels or meters, a second set of utility shutoffs, a full kitchen versus a wet bar, a private entrance that doesn't route through the main living space, and enough square footage and window placement to plausibly meet code as a real living space rather than a finished rec room that happens to have a door to the yard. Here's a practical checklist the team walks buyers through when touring a property with house hacking potential. First, is there a true separate entrance? Not just a walkout that also connects to the main stairwell. You want a door that a tenant can use without ever needing to access the rest of the house. Second, is there a full kitchen, meaning a stove or a cooktop, not just a mini fridge and a microwave? Because that distinction matters both for livability and for how the space may be classified. Third, are there separate utility controls, which is a strong signal that the space was built with genuine separation in mind rather than as an afterthought. Fourth, what does the egress look like? Are there windows large enough to meet safety code for a legal bedroom? Because this is one of the most common reasons a space fails to qualify as a legal unit, even when everything else about the house looks right. And fifth, this is the one buyers skip most often, what does the village actually say about this specific property? Has it been permitted for this use? And if not, what would it take to get there? Walking through those 5 questions on every property you tour will save you from the most common costly mistake in this kind of search, which is falling in love with a space based on how it looks rather than what it's actually allowed to be used for. One more honest point before our team wraps this up, because it's important context for anyone going into this kind of search. This is not a search where you'll find 3 or 4 strong options every single month. When you're looking for a standard single-family home in Northbrook, there's usually a reasonable pool of listings that fit your basic criteria within a normal search window. When you're specifically looking for a property with a legitimate, well-built secondary living space, that pool shrinks considerably, and it takes patience. Some months there's genuinely strong inventory to look at. Other months, the right property simply isn't on the market yet, and that has nothing to do with your search. It's a timing issue, not a sign that this goal isn't achievable here. Knowing that going in changes how the whole process feels. Instead of getting discouraged in a slow month, you understand it's simply part of searching for something that isn't common inventory. And you stay ready to move quickly once the right property does surface. That's why the team encourages buyers with this goal to get clear on their must-haves early and be prepared to act, rather than assuming there will always be more options next month. Before moving to the recap, we want to walk through what this actually looks like in practice, because numbers on a page and a real living situation are 2 different things. Picture a young family buying a home in Northbrook with a finished basement that has its own entrance, a small kitchenette, a full bath, and a bedroom with a proper egress window. In year 1, that space might sit empty while the family settles in, gets to know the layout, and decides how they want to use it. In year 2, once the family's comfortable, that space might become a rental, maybe a long-term tenant, maybe a young professional who wants the privacy of a separate entrance without the cost of a standalone apartment. The rent from that space doesn't need to cover the entire mortgage to be meaningful. Even a partial offset changes the monthly math in a real way. And over the life of the loan, that adds up. Then picture a different family a few years down the road, further into their lives, and that same space becomes something else entirely. A parent moving in, a grown child coming home between chapters, or simply a guest suite that gives everyone in the house more room to breathe. That's the real value of this kind of property. It's not just about income on day 1. It's about buying flexibility into the house itself, so the space can serve whatever your life actually needs at any given stage without you having to move. That flexibility also matters when it's time to sell. which is worth thinking about even if selling feels farther away right now. A legally permitted secondary living space is a genuine selling point down the line because the next buyer inherits the same flexibility you did. The option to rent, house family, or simply use the extra square footage. But this is exactly why permitting isn't just a today problem. A future buyer's lender, a future buyer's attorney, and a future buyer's own due diligence will ask the same questions you should be asking right now. If a space was never properly permitted, that can complicate a future sale, slow down a future buyer's financing, or become a negotiating point against you at the worst possible time. Buying a property with this kind of space already correctly permitted or going in with eyes open about what it would take to get there protects your investment on both ends of the transaction, the day you move in and the day you eventually move out. It's also worth being honest about the search itself, because this is probably the biggest adjustment for buyers coming into this with a standard home search mindset. When you're looking for a typical single-family home in Northbrook, you can usually find several strong options within your criteria in a reasonable window of time. When you're specifically looking for a property with a legal or convertible accessory living space, the pool is smaller and it takes patience. These properties don't always advertise themselves clearly. Sometimes a listing will mention a finished basement without ever using language like in-law suite or second kitchen, and you'd have no way of knowing its potential without either seeing it in person or having someone who knows what to look for reviewing it on your behalf. This is part of why the team encourages buyers with this goal to get very clear on their must-haves early and to be ready to move when the right property does surface, rather than assuming there will always be 3 more just like it next month. Some months, there's real inventory to look at. Other months, the right property simply isn't on the market yet. And that's important to know going in so the search doesn't feel discouraging when it's simply a timing issue. One question the team hears often is whether it's worth converting a regular basement into this kind of space after purchase rather than searching specifically for a property that already has it. That's a legitimate path, and for some buyers, it makes more sense than waiting for the rare listing that already checks every box. But it comes with its own consideration. A conversion means permits from the start, which means budgeting not for just the build out itself, but for egress windows if they don't already exist, for a separate electrical subpanel, for plumbing if a kitchenette or full bath isn't already roughed in, and for the time it takes to get through the village's approval process before any of that work can legally begin. For some buyers, this is the better route because it means you're not competing for a rare listing and you get to build the space exactly the way you want it. For others, finding a property where this work has already done and already permitted, it's worth the extra patience in the search. Neither path is automatically right. It depends on your timeline and your budget and how hands-on you want to be with a renovation on top of a home purchase. This is exactly the kind of decision worth walking through with your agent before you commit to a search, because it changes what you should actually be looking for on day one. So let's bring all of this together. House hacking on the North Shore doesn't look like it does in the city, and it doesn't look like what most generic content on this topic assumes. You're working with finished basements that have separate entrance, in-law suites built for genuine independent living, and in rarer cases, coach houses on the same lot as the main home. These properties don't advertise themselves clearly, so finding them takes someone who knows what to look for on a tour, not just a search filter. Financing depends heavily on whether the property is a true multi-unit building, which qualifies for programs like FHA's 2 to 4 unit loan, versus a single-family home with a bonus space, which is financed conventionally. Permitting is the piece that can't be skipped or assumed. A space needs to be verified as a legal rental use with the village before you count on any income from it. Property taxes in Cook County are calculated differently than in most of the country, and additional living space can affect your assessment. So that needs to be part of your math from the start. And the search itself takes patience because this is a smaller, less predictable slice of inventory than a standard single-family search. When you understand what to expect at each stage, the whole process feels completely different than going in blind. If you're considering this path, or you've been looking at listings and wondering whether a basement or addition you saw could actually work this way, reach out to the Caroline Gow team. The link is in the description below. With 24 years of experience on the North Shore, our team knows exactly what to look for when touring a property with this kind of potential and can help you understand whether a specific home actually supports what you're trying to do before you ever make an offer. Make sure you're subscribed and have the bell turned on so you don't miss the next video. We post every week. And if you know someone who's been asking about this exact thing, send this one their way. It might save them months of searching in the wrong direction. The Caroline Gow team will see you in the next one.